So we're ready to get started. Do you want me to do an intro? Do you want to do the intro?
No, you go ahead, and I will. If you start, I'll pull in.
Great. So hey y'all. So thank y'all again. I really appreciate y'all showing up for this session. This is the last of our four today. And so I know it's 6 o'clock on the East Coast. It's probably what, 5 o'clock Central Time. So I know this is the end of your day. So I appreciate y'all taking the time to show up. This is the last of four sections today on the Advocacy Toolkit. And this session really doesn't coincide with any section in particular because there aren't any resources that I know of. This is going to be one that we're creating as we go. Let me refocus that. My name is David. I'm the Deputy Executive Director for Black and Pink. My mind's a little scattered. This is the fourth one I've been in today. My pronouns are Z, them, zers. And Dom, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is Dominique Morgan. I am the Executive Director at Black and Pink. My pronouns are they, them, theirs.
Right, and so we want to take this session to kind of unpack what it's like for system impacted people to advocate. And Dom, do you want to talk a little bit about system impacted people? You had a great explanation for that, and I don't want to take those words from your mouth.
No problem. So historically, there have been clear conversations about incarcerated folks, formerly incarcerated folks. And there was this time where the hierarchy of even folks who had been inside of jails or prisons, we were deciding whose voice mattered based on how long you had been inside. And if we're doing this work and we have the opportunity to really remove the barriers to solidarity, we started using the term system impacted, which really, in my mind, when we think of norms, when we think of how we prevent folks from feeling othered, it's about who feels closer to the center. And using the term system impacted allows us to create a larger center. Now, I'm of the belief that most folks in our community are system impacted, but like the explanation that many of us have heard from of intersectionality from Kimberly Crenshaw, right, of this idea that if we're intersectional people, our oppression is intersectional. We're saying that the oppression you experience that's intersectional historically has been facilitated by systems, and therefore you are a system impacted individual. But with that conversation, there is a challenge of you having to really look at of the spectrum of being impacted versus the amount of privilege you have and things of that nature. Where are you? So identifying as system impacted allows us to come together and have more of an experience based on empathy and solidarity versus an experience of sympathy and approach from a space of white saviorism. But we then have to still say, okay, as who I am, for example, I am a Black gender nonconforming queer person who is formerly incarcerated, right? And those conversations that I have. But looking at where I currently am, those are facts and those are identities I carry. But I have been out of incarceration for 11 years. I make a certain amount of money. I have a certain amount of degrees and access to education, so on and so forth. So then I have to challenge myself within those identities I carry. Where am I really at now? How much should I be engaging? How much should my voice be centered? So on and so forth. So think about that as we have this conversation of what systems are you impacted by and what experiences of oppression you experience. And then I want you also to keep thinking about, based on that, what spaces of privilege do you have? Or if you're saying, it was a year ago, it was 3 years ago, like this is where I was, do that internal kind of inventory of where you are today. Because, for example, many of us who grew up impoverished, I know folks who are making $100,000 a year, but if they've grown up impoverished, they still function with that amount of money in their pockets as they did when they were in that poverty category. So, and it's because we're just living and we're just moving forward. So I'm hoping that through this conversation today, we're able to really talk about how we can show up and how we need to really have grace for each other, but also we're able to challenge who you are today versus even who you were 6 months ago or a year.
Right, and I would also challenge us to have grace for ourselves too. Especially for, people of color, especially Black people right now, with all the chaos that's happening, all the protests, the uprisings, the fact that COVID-19 just happened actually, it's not even just happened. It's been happening. It's still happening. It's probably going to continue happening for the next month. We're in a lot of time of strife and chaos right now too. So in that part of unpacking that privilege, also holding space for saying, this is exhausting. We are in a space now where we have to be able to hold ourselves with care and let each other know where we're at on that spectrum. How much space we have to give, what we can give, and being okay with that, and sitting in that uncomfortable space and just being okay with giving what you can. And I think with this, this community unrest thing, we talked a lot about privilege earlier. We've talked about bail support and court support. And so this conversation is really looking at the nexus of kind of all of those when you've been system impacted and you can't provide, what's the word I'm looking for? The supports that, other people are providing, and what those supports look like for you in a way that makes sense and still keeps you safe. Because I know for myself, being somebody who's experienced the system, I am still technically on good behavior until 2026, even though I walked out of a prison in 2007. So right now I'm still technically on paper. And if I were to get arrested again, I would potentially face another incarceration term of at least a decade. And so I can't do protests. I can't do those public things because I still carry that risk of being system involved again. And so I have to find other ways. So the ways that I do that are playing to my strengths. And I think a lot of what this conversation is going to be on is, what are your strengths in the movement and how do you show up like that? Because one of my strengths is research. One of my strengths is compiling things. Actually, I have this fantastic mug, based on the Strengths Finder that kind of talks about what your core strengths are. And a lot of what we're talking about when we're talking about community unrest in this conversation is leveraging those strengths. So with one of my strengths being input, that's me going in and compiling all this information, which is how this toolkit came about, was just searching out and saying, all right, we have all this information across the internet. Let's download this and put this here. And then trying to figure out how do we synthesize that. So then we also did these info sessions. I've been on these info sessions since noon today. And just, figuring out what their strengths look like and really saying, I'm okay with this being what I can provide.
I think it's even, and it's like that strength piece, David. And also, I think I've been trying to have a conversation, especially with Black women, Black trans women, Black femmes, of what do you owe to this movement? Because there's so much labor that happens from those identities, especially on a day-to-day basis. It's in a time when we're in crisis, it's really saying is this yours to hold right now? And if you do feel like part of this is yours to hold, how much? And how much space are you creating for you to take care of yourself? Who's taking care of you? That's something that we have to talk about as well, is that you may be able to physically, based on the law, so on and so forth, but should you have to? And we don't talk about that enough, the have to portion. And I hope we can talk about that today, and people can really think about what does it mean to really be in solidarity with folks. And your action of solidarity is that you're taking care of and loving on yourself, or you're finally challenging people to show up for you the ways they should have been showing up for you. Additionally, for some people, it is unsafe for you to show up, not just in circumstances as David shared about people being reincarcerated and all those things that are frightening, but when we're talking about spaces where tensions can get high and we're not sure who's all out there at these events and so on and so forth, and you're already the most marginalized amongst folks, it can feel inherently unsafe just showing up and being in those large crowds. Or if you're a person navigating the lived experience of living with HIV or AIDS or any other virus that can have you immunocompromised, being in large crowds can be unsafe because you're afraid to get sick. And that doesn't mean that you don't care about your people. It doesn't care that the murder of George Floyd didn't matter to you. It just means that you can't care if you're not alive. And I think we don't talk enough about that it takes a lot of privilege to engage in protests and pushing back on systems. I've seen text messages of young people who have been fired from their jobs because the owner of the restaurant or wherever they work has seen their posts, and Nebraska, for instance, is an at-will state, and they've been fired simply because of their own personal views. That's not even them being at a protest or some sort of demonstration. This is them saying Black Lives Matter as a hashtag. So it's something that I don't feel we talk about enough in movement work. I think in movement work, we also perpetuate this thing that the more you go, like you have to push yourself to the point, to the brink of exhaustion, to the brink of you having nothing left for you to really be doing the work.
Right.
I know myself, there was a long pattern of if I got home and I still had the energy to do anything else, I wondered, did I really accomplish anything that day? Compared to the days when I could walk home and I could barely get my shoes off and I would crawl into bed and I'm like, oh, I really did my thing. And once I was positioned to lead an agency and then set that example for my staff, right? I realized, yes, Dominique, you're telling your staff not to text on the weekend or not to work on the weekend, but you are. So my words weren't matching my behavior. And then there was a space where we also have talked about we are pushing back on issues that predate us, and whether we like it or not, will outlive us. We are not going to end systematic racism in the next 20 years. We're not going to. So we're hoping that we also can think about what can you do? What can you do that will serve yourself? What can you do that will make sure that you're around to see success if it happens? A lot of us are working in a way to where if we do get to glory tomorrow, we're working to where we don't make it to see it. And that's frightening as well, to be fighting for a world in a way that you are abusing your body, mind, and spirit, and you may not be around to enjoy that world. So those are the things that are really at the top of my head. Those are the things that I was thinking about when we talked about this space. It's really about grace. It's about questions. It's about transparency. Please use the chat. Please ask those questions. Please feel free to engage with us, because it's also something scary to say out loud. Is
Right.
that everybody else I know was down at the protest, but I didn't feel safe going. Or everyone is saying, you're young, you're this, you should be doing this, and I don't feel like, one, either that's safe for me, or two, I just can't go because. So that's what we've been thinking about. David.
Yeah, and I think at the root of all this is just being, and this is even a privilege in of itself, is just being honest with yourself. What are your needs right now? Especially considering, because I mean, when we're asking ourselves to be, when I'm asking you to be honest with yourself, I'm thinking not only in the context of your day-to-day life, I'm thinking in the context of the global pandemic that's happening. I'm thinking of the context within the national protests and national strikes that are happening. I'm thinking, like, because all these things are going to come to bear on what you can and cannot provide, what you want to provide, what you won't provide. And all of that's rooted in this idea of just being honest with yourself. And even then, like, you have to unpack, what does that honesty mean? And have you ever allowed yourself to be honest like that? I know for myself, up until this past year, I was never really honest with my needs. I have been in and out of organizations just because I burnt myself out where I was working. I think for a long stretch of time, there was a time where I was working like 15, 16-hour days, 7 days a week for years on end, because as somebody who's experienced the system, I felt that my value was in the work. I didn't see the value in myself. And it took a very long time to step back and go, no, fuck this. Like, I am a human. I have value, and it's not just my body, not just my labor that I can provide. It's just me being me. Just me showing up every day is value. And I think that is something that we need to carry with us as, today and every day, is that moving forward, that we understand that our value is in us, and it's not just in the labor that we provide, and making sure also that we extend that to everybody else that we interact with, and just seeing, because I think too that the heart of Black and Pink's work is this idea of community and understanding that we're all in this together. And so, in being all in this together means that we need to understand where everybody's at in their life. Because one of the central tenets for us at Black and Pink is meeting people where they're at. And by that, we mean, everybody comes into this work with different life experiences. And so when we're meeting people where they're at, we're kind of understanding that, somebody may be at a different space than you are, but that doesn't make their work any less valuable. It doesn't make them any less valuable. And so we've got to be able to make sure that we understand that, and we come to that with compassion, we come to that with grace, we come to that with honesty, because honestly, we can't do this work if we're at each other's throats. I mean, we're already having entire systems that are down our necks and putting their boots on us. Like, why the hell are we going to have to argue and fight amongst ourselves?
I think that's super important. And I'm also sitting here thinking about young people. Like just the identity of being young is a barrier in our society, right? There's a belief that young people don't know what they want. There's a belief that their values aren't developed. There's a belief that they are wishy-washy, all of those things. And what I can say is who I've seen out here consistently in these streets from the jump were young people. Were people who are saying that I don't want to have the same lived experience my grandparents and great grandparents had, that I understand the history of our society and I want to dismantle it. And at the same time, adults in the community, those of us who are the most privileged, are not believing in these young people and showing up for them the way we should. And sometimes showing up is giving them funds to facilitate actions the way they see fit, and us not being at the table dictating what it means, but us saying like, I support you and this is how I support you. Or my favorite thing is asking folks how you can support them. But being young in this work is a barrier as well. We don't believe young people. We don't trust in the leadership of young people. We don't see that young people have the power, that they not only know enough, they know more than enough, because they're the closest to this. When you think of James Scurlock, who was 22 years old, I am not his contemporary. Have I been thinking about this young man every day since he was murdered? Do I have nightmares? Do I think about, oh, what could I have possibly done to prevent this, or all these other things? Yes. But I know that if I do the work to really invest in someone who would have been James's homeboy that he texts, or a friend on the block, that I'm actually putting the resources and the information where it needs to be, and it's going to live amongst the people who talk to each other. So I think we also really need to get out of the way of young people. We have to get out of the way of young people, and not get out of the way in a hands off, but get out of the way in a trust, based out of trust and respect, and leaving them with the understanding that we are still available, that we are a resource, that we understand that we are not the be all end all, but we are a resource and we are here, because young people do want our information. They do want our knowledge and wisdom, but they want to be in charge of how they access it. And we have to be explicit in the fact that we are there in that capacity to them. What I know now more than ever is that we have to do the work to really pour into young people. We really have to do the work to pour into young people in ways that, at a level that we haven't before, especially young Black people who historically are not labeled as leaders, as change makers, as thought leaders, simply because of their race. They aren't seen as change makers simply because of the zip code that they were born into. They're not seen as people that can really develop others because they haven't had access to a degree. All those things, we have to dismantle that. Young people, I think, are some of the most system impacted people in our communities. And I have it heavy on my heart thinking about young people right now.
And I think also too, like, I feel like we're also throwing out a lot of big things too. And I and I know that that's how Dom and I work. And also I think like here it's us trying to say, here's all the shit in the center here. Let's take like a bird's eye view to see like how all these things are coming together. Because at the end of the day, all these protests and all these riots that are happening nationwide, we have to take a step back and say, all right, here's this moving piece. Here's this moving piece. Here's how this, and then trying to figure out like how all these connections work. Because I think at the end of the day, if you're trying to get involved in this work, it's going to, and you can't necessarily do the protest, or you can't do the things that are quote unquote traditional organizing. It's trying to figure out where you can plug in, and figuring out, again, as Dom has said, like, do you need to plug in? What is your energy level right now? How are you feeling? Are you feeling safe in your body? Are you feeling okay with doing that protest or doing that research or volunteering or bailing somebody out? I mean, there's endless options, but at the end of the day, it's you that have to make that decision on what feels right for you.
Yeah, I thank you for bringing us to like actionable items, David, because I think that's important. And one last like category of folks who I feel like are often the barriers to them engaging in moments like this are not really discussed are folks who have any disabilities. Like a protest is not ADA compliant. You know, if you're in a wheelchair or you have a walker or you're easily fatigued, so on and so forth, like these spaces are not really built for you to engage. And I think this can sound petty to people, but another thing that is happening is that this is how you feel a part of right now. Like these protests, these demonstrations, this is how people don't feel alone, right? You don't feel alone in your grief. You don't feel alone in your anxiety. You don't feel alone in powerlessness. Um, and when you can't join in on that because of things that are outside of your power, because of just who you are and what your body is experiencing, how do we make sure that all folks don't have the opportunity to have access to community, and all folks understand that they have the right to community? I feel like community is a foundational right that we have as people. And Sam B said, and visa and green card issues, right? Like there's so many layers to the why of that will prevent people at the end of the day from having community. When people were out in the streets and it was right after George Floyd's murder, yes, people are angry, but also people were grieving together. It was a mass funeral. We have been living through George's funeral in the streets of our cities all across the country, right? And when I say that because I was about 6 months into my prison sentence. I was 20 years old and my father died. And they gave me an option of either going to his funeral or going to the graveside. And I chose to go to the funeral. And I remember, they took me to the funeral shackled and handcuffed, and I was there with my siblings and my mother. And in that moment, I did not feel alone. In that moment, I cried for the first time with some sort of understanding that someone was there to catch me or even give a damn about my tears. And then immediately when I went back to prison, I got back to the prison. It was around count, and count is when they lock us in our rooms and count us. And it can take a pretty wild time. And they took us back, and it was right during count. And I remember they put me in my cell. My roommate was asleep. He didn't want to talk to me about that. And I remember just crying and crying in my pillow because I didn't want anyone to hear me. And really like, okay, I have to be okay. I have to get better because no one cares. And because my family is so far away from me. It feels like that with folks who have barriers to engaging in these demonstrations and these opportunities of community of who do you grieve with? Who affirms the pain that you're feeling? Who lets you know or whispers to you in that moment, it's going to be okay. We're going to be okay. Those things are really those things are really important. And so I know that through Black and Pink, we have our pen pal program. I really think our pen pal program is an opportunity, not just for our inside members, our inside family who's incarcerated. It's an opportunity for folks in the community to build community outside of what we tell you can have for community. And I think it's a beautiful opportunity to have a reciprocal relationship with another person. So I always push people to our Black and Pink pen pal opportunities. I know that there are so many organizations like Beam and other places that are doing online healing spaces or spaces for people to gather and just have these conversations. We're going to, as we find online platforms for those sort of healing opportunities, the toolkit that you all received that is online. I don't know if David said it, but it's a living document. So as we find information, we're going to plug it in. And I want to say, Nikki said earlier, there's also a link where if you find resources, you can send us those resources and we will add them as well. But online platforms exist. And then all the way on the other spectrum of find a person. Maybe you're in a situation where it's just like, I don't have a bunch of people that care. I feel so very alone. the sometimes just one person that you can send that text message to of, I'm struggling right now, this feels very heavy to me right now, can be so helpful. So that's something that I try to make sure that we can do for everyone. So please, if you are system impacted on this call and you're like, yo, I don't have any of those people, reach out to us and we will try to get you. Like, historically, pen pals have been really facilitated for inside family, but I know if we put a message in the Black and Pink pen pal group, this person needs a text, this person needs a process, that would be available. And we also know that technology and phones aren't something that everyone has. So we don't want to make the assumption that everyone can access that way. Right now, the sad thing is that on top of this universal grief we're experiencing, we're still in a pandemic where it feels unsafe to be in large crowds or sometimes meet people one-on-one. Megan from Facebook, from both myself and friends I've spoken to this week, friendships have been broken or lost for a lot of people this week. I think admitting you are struggling and hurting and may need additional support is very hard for a lot of people. How can we provide support and our mental health resources available for those who are struggling? I will first say that I've had to really do the work of seeing the positivity in all of this. And what I can say is, when friendships have ended because of you standing up for what is right, those people didn't align with your values, and that friendship wasn't what would really feed you. And that's what friendship is about, right? This reciprocal experience of love and understanding and growth. So I want you to receive it as this is an opportunity for you to find people who really align with who you are or who you are becoming. And it is difficult because no one wants to say they're struggling. At a time right now where we know that definitely people are being murdered in the streets. Do we want to say on Facebook, I'm having a hard day? Do we want to text somebody and say, I'm sad because it feels scary, or we're trying to center ourselves, or just in general, it's just hard to say I'm struggling? I think now is the best time ever to say we're struggling, because that pretense and the smoke and mirrors of us having to be perfect and knowing it all, I think this is the best time to let it go. Because in my experience, when I've been able to say I don't know, when I've been able to let go of this idea that I have everything figured out, that's when people that I didn't even know had my back showed up, right? And the last part of your question, there are mental health resources. Again, you will hear me say things about Omaha, Nebraska, just because that's where we are at. But I also try to, even if it's a truth of Nebraska, I try to only speak about things that should be found across the country. Most communities have a federally qualified health center where you can access services at no cost. Most agencies have transferred to a telehealth experience. So for instance, here in Omaha, Nebraska, there's Charles Drew Health Center, and you can call Charles Drew and you can set up an appointment. And due to the sliding scale and all those other things, you're going to get access to services, whether you have insurance or not. Funds are not a barrier, and you can access them through phone or via technology. And I know most spaces have transferred to that. There are also some amazing text therapy apps that I've seen people use online. And I know there's a lot of like support groups that people have really shifted to outside of Facebook to really gather. But those are, I would really push people towards their federally qualified health center, because that's what they're receiving funds for, and this is their time to step up and provide those services. And it's historically not a barrier for anyone who is without insurance and doesn't have the funds to pay the historical costs of therapy and even psychiatric treatment, because that's very important. The last thing I'm gonna say and kind of move back, this is also not the time to not be diligent about our medication. As a person who is on hormones as a person who takes meds for for HIV, as a person who takes meds for ADHD. All of these identities I carry, right? And I have these days where I'm going a million miles a minute, and I'm like, Lord, what's going on? I have to make sure that I'm taking my meds, because when whatever you have access to that's benefiting you is already being pushed to the max with what you're experiencing. Without those things accessible to you in your system, it really can set you up for a deep crisis. And because everyone's seeking therapy services and so on, they're over inundated. So it may be difficult for you to get back into care and so on and so forth. So please, if you have to set an alarm on your phone, make sure you do that. And Nikki said, and water. Drink plenty of water. There have been days when I'm like, I have an attitude, I don't feel good. And it's been like, child, have you drank any water today? Scheduling when you eat, making sure that you are at least, trying to eat 3 times. Does it have to be a big amount of food? No, but making sure that you are putting something in your system. I said this the other day, anger, grief, and frustration cannot be the only fuel that we're putting in our bodies. And that's really important at this time, in my opinion, as well.
Right. And I would say that if you have additional questions, please put them in the chat. We'll answer them. And I think to go back to Megan's point and to, uplift a little bit of what Dom has said about vulnerability, about providing support and mental health resources. I think one of the easiest things, and if you're capable and you have the space and you're willing to be vulnerable, is creating that space on your social media. I mean, a simple post, doing like a check-in saying, green heart, you feel X, blue heart, you feel X, pink heart feels X, and create that space for you and talk about like where you're at. And even then it could just be a conversation or dialogue in the chat box itself. I mean, it's an easy thing to do, but it can go a long ways. I would also hazard too that like white people, and we talked a little bit in the last conversation on like privilege and whiteness. White people, if you're feeling a certain way this time, don't try and rely on your black family that are going through it, because they're already going through a lot more of other things, and that's putting a lot more stress on pressure to hold space for your whiteness as well in that point. And I personally, and Dom can correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like that's putting an additional burden that they shouldn't have to carry at that point. So it's also like, taking stock of your identity and how much of your challenges and your struggles you're willing to put on other people.
Yeah, I think that's so important, David, because we're going to want to show up for you. We're going to want to show up, even in our fatigue, even in our fear. I'll be honest, for me, some days lately, it's even felt taxing for me to respond to messages of positivity. Some of the most amazing things that my white friends have done for me is, I don't expect a response, but such and such and such and such. So I don't feel bad when it's been a whole day and I haven't messaged them back, and you sent me this beautiful message. I don't feel like I didn't receive it or acknowledge it. And I feel like that's something everyone can use. Like, if you want to send out affirmations and reach out to folks, preface it by saying, I have no expectation of a response. I just want to send this to you, right? Because it can feel, I would feel like I have felt like I'm neglecting people the last couple of days. Like, I didn't text this person back. I haven't called this person. I haven't done this thing. And knowing internally it's not about me ignoring them. I just hit a wall. And how do you say that to someone who is trying to either reach out to you with something positive, or it's someone you love and care about and they're saying, I'm struggling. So it's a very delicate time. It's a very, and as Nikki said, and be okay if they don't respond. Don't say it and don't mean it. Because for me, it's been a couple of days. I have a moment when I'm finally, I get in bed and, of course, I think I'm tired and my brain doesn't stop. And that's when I'm able to return those messages. And sometimes it's not even me saying words, but it's me putting a heart on it or something just to let them know I see it and I receive it. And it's really helpful. Maya said, I have a chronic illness as well as several other medical conditions that keep me from being able to protest and limits my energy level. However, I have a deep desire to help and to be of assistance. Can you recommend ways to help help despite having physical and energy limitations? One thing David said, I think this is right, the tool of social media. I think it's dope because sometimes all I need somebody to do is share what I've posted. Like the power of a share, the power of amplifying, boosting a signal or something is really dope. I also tell people, like, Maya, spend the time figuring out what your superpower is. Spend the time figuring out what your superpower is. And the reason I use the tense of superpower is that I remember growing up and collecting cards of like superheroes, right? And it would list what their strengths were, and it would list their what they called weaknesses. I don't use I don't use those terms anymore. I see where are my opportunities for growth, but that allows you to be both, yes and, right? But really be clear about your superpower is what does Maya do that's so dope? And then figure out yourself or find community that can help you figure out how do I use the thing that I'm really great at? How can that impact this issue that I care about? Somebody said one day, well, I just know how to organize really well. And I'm like, okay, well, these are the things, pantries, people who are getting out of incarceration who are trying to figure out how to organize their apartment for the first time. I can give you a list, like those things matter. So please think about your superpower. And if you are struggling then to figure out how your superpower can be weaponized against an issue you care about, reach out to us, because that's one of my superpowers is I can always tell someone how important they are and how their importance can really affect issues around us.
And Nikki, I kind of want to make some space for you because I know that you probably have some thoughts on this. You kind of shared a little bit about your identity earlier, and if you want to, pop on and, answer a little bit to Maya, I want to create some space for that right now.
You're making me get on camera again.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, so I'm Nikki, Zap, she, her, hers. I have a chronic pain condition that I acquired at 30 years old. I've used, that affects my mobility. I've been using a manual wheelchair outside of my home for the last almost 6 years. And Dom knew me before and during and now. And so it is really difficult when, especially with chronic pain, chronic illnesses, anything that takes away our energy, takes up space and energy that we might not have. I think that for me, one of the biggest things is finding the people that I can be vulnerable with, to share where my spoons are. If you don't know about spoon theory, Google spoon theory, and figuring out, where I'm at. So like, I don't remember if it was I think yesterday, I woke up and my pain was really bad and I had a bunch of stuff, work that I was doing for Black and Pink. And I just sent a note in the Slack and I was like, hey y'all, I'm sorry that I woke up late or that I'm, getting into work late, having a bad pain day. And I feel so fortunate because David has continued to check in on me. Dom has continued to check in on me. Our other colleagues have continued to check in, and not in an annoying way, but in a just like, I know you said this, I want to see how you're doing. And over the years, I've been able to kind of curate those folks around me, and know who the people are who I can just vent and say, I have all these things that I wanted to do today, and I just don't have the spoons. I just don't have the energy to deal with it. I think that's a really big piece of it as well. So kind of knowing, I think that's part of a superpower is knowing ourselves, which you two have continued to talk about. As a disabled person, as a CRIP, it's important to know that part of myself. But yes, social media, I think, is like uplifting Black voices, uplifting voices of folks who have experienced incarceration in these times. And, you know, even like Dom already talked about the Pen Pal program, right? Like that's something that you can sign up for and take on one pen pal, and maybe that's one letter a week or one email a week or whatever your capacity is. And you can do that from the comfort of whatever you call home. You don't have to go out or do anything, and you can be doing things that are within your energy level.
Right.
And also Maya and any other Crips here, like my inbox is always open, admin@blackandpink.org. Happy to support you in resources any way I can.
And also, I think too, like looping back to earlier conversations about being honest, is being honest about what your energy limits are and being okay with that, because where your energy limits are beautiful and they're all yours. And whatever you can provide is uniquely to you, and that is okay. Because again, we're in the middle of a damn pandemic on top of like all these protests. Of course, your energy levels are going to be low. Of course, you're going to be navigating a lot of challenging emotions, and that's okay. And I think that is it. I think we're so taught that we have to take on so much and take on so much more and take on so much more to the point that we get to a breaking point. And I think that we need to start radicalizing what labor we can produce and what spiritual labor, what mental labor, what emotional labor, all that labor, what that labor looks like, is start radicalizing. It's okay to, provide X, Y, and Z. And amount doesn't matter.
And you don't owe anyone anything.
Amen.
I'm sitting here, thinking about survivor's remorse as well. And like this idea, I know for me, there are days when I get up and do work because I'm like, well, why me? Why did I get out of prison and get an opportunity for an education? Why did I get out of prison and get an opportunity to have the career that I have? Why me, right? And feeling guilty about it, and working from that sort of spirit, which isn't healthy and not based in restoration or progress. And I wonder if that's some things that are out here in our community today, where we're watching the murder of our people on Facebook Lives and on Instagram videos, and it's casually going down our feed. That feeling of survivor's remorse. I'm still here, and I feel like I should be doing something. I'm here, I'm living, I'm breathing, I should be doing something. And then your mind pivots to, but that something that people are telling me that I can do feels unsafe. I'm afraid to do the something. And we have to let that go as well, because you're here because you're meant to be here. And no one was traded for you, or no one was slighted for your existence or your opportunity. You're here. And you can't look at your blessings and opportunities in that fashion, because it doesn't allow you to really embrace it and appreciate it and grow from them. That's something I've had to work through with my therapist. Is everything I have, I'm meant to have it. I'm meant to be in this moment right now. I'm meant to be at 5:43 p.m. Central Standard Time in Omaha, Nebraska. I was meant to be right here on this Zoom call with you all. And I have to move forward that way, because otherwise it becomes too much. And then I'm working in a way that I feel like I'm trying to make up for the millions of my family who are inside these prisons. And that's a weight that my body can't handle. So as you think about that why piece of not only recognizing that your reasons for why you can't protest, or any of the other ways that people have been showing up as of late, are not accessible to you. Also, why do you want to show up that way? Why do you want to show up that way? Because it gets easier to release the desire for something when you're really clear of the why of the desire, and then you're able to meet the feelings associated in a different way, right? It's kind of like people who become vegetarians, right? It's not that I'm not. This isn't one of those moments. This isn't one of those moments because this is recorded, so I don't want to do that to the people. But it's like, oh, I'm meat in its current form is not for me. What do I like about meat? Is it the texture? Is it the flavor, right? And then with other items, they recreate it. So they meet their needs of I want to divest from red meat, all these other things. And then they're very clear about what they enjoyed about it and what needed meant for them. And then they're able to recreate it and find it in other things. Is it exactly the same? No, but it's about really understanding what they're seeking and what their objective is. And so when you think about why you want to show up, if you feel like you can't show up in the ways that you feel like are being laid out, how can you figure out how to feel like you are present, feel like you're being active in whatever capacity is safest for you?
And I think also to follow up with that, it's okay to feel these things too. And I want you to give yourself permission to feel all of them. I know that after this call, I'm probably going to have about a 15-minute cry session just because I've been doing this all day. And working through my lived experience on these calls has been really taxing. And it's been really difficult at some points today to share things. But I also feel like these things are important for us to share. And I think it's also important that we need to give ourselves just permission to feel all that rage, to feel that anger, to feel that sadness. And if you need to, journal about it. Dance it out. Cry it out. Do what you got to do. Yeah, but I want to make sure that we understand that it's okay to have those feelings, and it's okay to be feeling what we need to feel. So feel what you got to do. Do it. I would say do it productively. I don't want to say constructively, but I would say do it productively. Just find some way to do it where you can journal, where you can, I don't know if you have a gym that you can get to. I don't know what your stay-at-home orders look like right now, what your community gym looks like right now. But if you can get to a gym and a punching bag, do that. If you can go out for a run, do yoga, do something. Just get
Baby masturbate. Shit.
Yes.
I keep telling people this is the perfect time to know your body, and sexual pleasure has so many doggone benefits. Like, because I'm not that girl that's about to pick up any weights. Driving past the gym gives me anxiety. So like whatever your spirit, if you want to cook, if you just sit outside and put your feet in the grass, like your thing is your thing. To use more sexual health language, like don't let anybody yuck your yum, because it's for you. It's about you. And the more that you really center you, the more that you're prepared to offer you up to the people who you want to support, because that's really what happens, is that you're giving yourself to others. But there's not an unlimited amount of yourself. So you really need to make sure how much you're giving up, why you're giving it up, and how much you're saving for yourself.
Right. And I think the other key, and I mean, just with this too, like the other key piece of that toolkit was, this is Dom's idea, was making sure that we celebrate and affirm Black love. The very last piece in the toolkit is my favorite piece, because it was a space, and Dom can speak more to this because I don't want to speak over them for this, but this is a space where we could just recognize and honor just the difficulty that Black people are going through right now.
Absolutely. This was just a we see us type moment. And we see us without any judgments, without any expectations, and any actionable items that you all hear. We hope that there are actionable items that really are for your betterment, is what we hoped, because it's not easy. And we're all going. And what I know is that if we keep working that way, we're not going to be, like I said earlier, we won't be around to see the type of world we're trying to work towards. And we won't be around for the people that we really love. And that's how George's life becomes in vain. That's how Brianna's life is in vain, when the systems that stole them from us continue to steal us from each other. So we really have to stop that cycle and put up those boundaries and preserve ourselves, because I think that's one of the most radical things you can do.
Right. So I don't know if I have much left to say. I know that I am tapped out. If there are no more questions, I would love to give y'all the remaining 10 minutes back of your time. I thank y'all so much for showing up today. I celebrate y'all for, sticking around at this last one. I know this is so late in the day for a lot of y'all. I know there's a lot of other things y'all could be doing. So I appreciate y'all sharing space with us. Dom or Nikki, do y'all have any last words?
No, I feel really good. I just want to thank you all as well for being very vulnerable in the place, because that's not easy. And please share this, the Facebook Live and the recordings once they're on YouTube, because I want everyone to know that this isn't easy. And some people try to make it easy, but easy, it shouldn't even be said in the same sentence as what we all are engaging in right now in our communities.
Yeah, and I also want to add that it is possible to be in community, whether it be personally or professionally, with people who are authentically themselves and vulnerable and support each other. Sometimes I think that when I began that journey, I was like, it's just not possible. And it is. And so, and I say that it is because I'm living in it, and have lived in it. And so I just want to give you that hope, no matter what. And then this has been recorded. It will be, all of our sessions today, all 4, will be posted on YouTube tomorrow. They are on Facebook now because we have also been Facebook Living this event. All 4 of these sessions, so they're on there too. I know I've already talked to several people who are like, I need to watch that one again, and I need to watch that other one again. They are available for you. All of our things are now on video, so people are just gonna pull snippets and decide whatever to pull from. But I want to thank David and Dominique for their vulnerability and authenticity, sharing of themselves so much in this session in particular, and all today. Again, please contact us if you have any questions or want further resources or anything like that. Finally, Dominique, would you like to plug, we have another webinar roundtable happening tomorrow?
Yes, tomorrow, myself and Mariah Moore and Aria Saeed, we are going to be talking about the legacy of Black trans freedom fighters. Pride Month has come upon us, and I think it's a lot of synergy around what we're seeing in our communities and what the foundational pieces of Stonewall were about. And 3, transgender non-conforming folks are going to be having this. Black folks are going to just be talking about, like, what does this feel like and how does this show up, and what solidarity measures look like, and how we can have impact. 8 p.m. Central Standard Time. The same setup as this will be out there, so make sure y'all check out our pages, and we'll push that out for anyone to join us. But yeah, tomorrow night.
Yep, we'll be posting the registration link here in a little bit on our socials. We want to thank you so much. I know that several of you were on 2, 3, 4 of these sessions with us today, so thank you for spending your Wednesday with us. We're going to continue to do these, and please let us know other things that you would like our amazing staff and colleagues across the world to share with you.
Perfect. Thank you, y'all.
Bye, y'all.